do your human rights have borders? I mean, it's a huge question, right? It sits at the very heart of international law, and it affects everything, from military action to global surveillance. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the one landmark case that really tried to answer it.
So let's make this personal for a second. Imagine your government takes action in another country. Do its own human rights laws still protect the people it affects over there? It sounds like it should be a simple yes or no, but believe me, the answer is incredibly complex.
Now, the fancy legal term for this whole idea is extraterritorial reach. The easiest way to think about it is like a Wi-Fi signal for your rights. Is that signal strong enough to cross oceans and borders, or does it just cut out the second a government's action leaves its own physical territory? This is the core concept we're digging into today.
All right, let's dive into our first section, a question of borders. This is where we get to the core of the problem.
You know, in the 21st century, the idea that a country's responsibilities just stop at its coastline feels, well, it feels completely outdated. Nations project power everywhere now, through military operations, diplomatic missions, global intelligence. Their influence is basically borderless. And this creates this huge legal gray area. When a government acts overseas, is it still bound by its own human rights laws, or can it just operate under a totally different set of rules? This is the fundamental clash that courts have been forced to try and figure out. Which brings us to Section 2, the case of Mr. Ullah. Let's look at the real-world test that dragged this abstract legal question into a UK courtroom. So, back in the early 2000s, a man named Mr. Ullah, who was facing deportation from the UK, made an argument. He said his rights under the European Convention on Human Rights were at risk. This kicked off a massive legal battle that by 2004 went all the way up to the House of Lords, which was the UK's highest court back then. They were forced to decide just how far those rights really extended. The whole case really boiled down to two completely opposite views. On one side, Mr. Ullah's team argued that the UK's human rights obligations should follow its actions, no matter where in the world they have an effect. But the government argued that its duties were primarily territorial, that their obligations pretty much stopped at the border. The court's decision here was going to have massive implications.
And that leads us to Section 3, the Ullah Principle, because the court's landmark decision created a legal concept that is now known by his name.
In the final judgment, Lord Bingham wrote that the duty is to secure rights to all persons within its jurisdiction. Now, pay attention to that key word there. It's not territory, it's jurisdiction. And that single word, it shifts the entire focus from a place on a map to a sphere of power and control. And just like that, this was the birth of the Ullah Principle, the answer the legal world had been desperately searching for.
So what does this actually mean in practice? Well, it basically creates a two-step test. Step 1, the default position is that human rights obligations apply inside a country's own borders. But, and this is the really important part, Step 2 creates this crucial exception. Those obligations can extend abroad, but only if the state exercises direct control or authority over a person.
So, the crucial takeaway is this. Rights don't just automatically follow the flag, they follow control. If a state, through its agents like soldiers or diplomats, has effective control over you, then its human rights obligations kick in no matter where you are in the world.
Okay, Section 4, why this principle matters. So what's the lasting impact of this one decision from 2004? Honestly, it's huge.
The Ullah Principle set a really clear, though very high, standard. It's influenced countless court cases ever since, especially those dealing with military actions in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where foreign forces had control over detainees. It also shapes really important decisions about things like extradition, forcing governments to think about a person's rights even after they've been sent to another country. It's a powerful precedent that keeps defining the limits of what a state is responsible for.
At the end of the day, the Ullah Principle is walking a very, very fine line. It represents this constant balancing act in international law, the sovereignty of a nation on one side, and the idea of universal human rights on the other.
And this leaves us with a really challenging final question for today's world. A world of remote drone strikes, global data surveillance, and super complex international operations. Is the idea of control still a clear enough standard? The Ullah Principle gave us an answer for its time, but the debate it started is far, far from over. So, where do you think a nation's responsibility should end?